Вітаю. 12
Welcome. 12 years of war. On the 20th of February 2014, this was the official date which was recognized by the Ukrainian parliament, the date of the start of the war of Russian Federation against Ukraine. That is when Putin made this infamous medal for the illegal capture of Crimea. Putin had started preparing for this much earlier, 2003, the Isle of Tuzla, when President Kuchma showed to the whole world that Ukraine is not going to accept redrawing of borders. 2004, the Ukrainian revolution, when the war criminal Putin welcomed and greeted his pro-Russian president Yanukovych with the victory, which was non-existent. 2013, when Putin thought that the revolution would not happen and Ukraine would fall, but Ukraine showed how we can fight for our independence. Now in the world there are broad discussions that the epoch of the world order has come to an end, and it has happened just now. But I disagree with that. The world order started at the time when Putin started the annexation of Crimea, and before that when he launched aggression against Georgia. All the international documents related to inviolability of borders, 1975, at that time a trip to Helsinki would take 1 hour. But later it transpired that borders can be violated, just like the Charter of the UN and a number of bilateral agreements, including the large-scale Ukraine-Russia agreement, in which Russia recognized our territorial integrity. And it's been proven that if there's no enforcement mechanism, none of the agreements stand. What was the reaction of the West to the illegal annexation of Crimea and the war, which started in 2014? There was an attempt at a dialogue, but Putin accepted the attempt at a dialogue as an attempt of appeasement. This had happened before the Second World War, and it is this appeasement which led to the full-scale aggression of 2022.
Коли розпочалася війна 22-го року,
When the war of 2022 started, the West reacted differently. It showed an unprecedented unity of the Western world. Putin did not expect that. There were sanctions and unified front against the tyrant. Ukraine became an example of a fight for independence and world order, the remnants of the world order. When sanctions were implemented and the West showed its unity and force, we should have realized that we live in a new world, and in that new world, Russia was not the only one who wanted to change the world order. A new axis of evil came to be. In this axis, China is a key ally of Russia, plus North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, and other totalitarian regimes that want to redraw the borders. And the fact that Ukraine is fighting together with our Western allies thwarts their plans.
тільки вчора завершилась угода про
Yesterday, an agreement
обмеження стратегічних
came to an end, the agreement on the strategic arms limitations, the so-called START, and now we can encounter new examples of proliferation and stockpiling of nuclear weapons. I believe that Russia basically used the nuclear weapons because the threat of the use is also relevant. In 2022, it made an impact on the calculus of the American administration, and Russia said that they were ready to use nuclear weapons. And the violation of non-proliferation happened in 2014. I will remind you about the Budapest Memorandum when the nuclear Russia launched an aggression against a nuclear-free country which had unilaterally and voluntarily relinquished the third nuclear arsenal in the world. So where do we stand now? 19% of the Ukrainian territory has been occupied. More than 1 million of killed and wounded Russian soldiers. The Russian defense industry and the Russian economy and Russian finance are in dire straits. Discussions are underway that Russia can attack NATO countries. Ukraine has done everything possible to defend itself and to make sure that Russia cannot attack NATO allies. Russia is not capable of doing this now. So the main thing that happened, Ukraine has withstood as an independent and sovereign state. And the future of the world will depend on how this war is going to end. It should end in definitely and exclusively victory of Ukraine. I emphasize the word victory of Ukraine. So what's next? And this is the topic of our discussion. I believe that the basic scenario, unfortunately, is that the hostilities will continue. Russia has spent for the war over the last 12 years $350 billion more than Ukraine and its allies. And today the intelligence service of Germany made it public that Russian expenditures for war are 66% higher than what is publicly admitted by Russia. Putin is not prepared for any realistic talks, and if you take a look at the composition of their negotiation teams, this is basically something new that the military basically are engaged in diplomatic talks. For me, this is an indication of the fact that Russia is not prepared to put an end to this war, and they don't want peace. Another scenario is a temporary truce or ceasefire, and to attain that, we need to fulfill several tasks. We need to keep our allies, and primarily the U.S., on the right side of history. Without the Americans, it would be difficult for us to prevail in this war. So the task number one is unity between the U.S. and Ukraine. Secondly, financial and military assistance. We welcome the decision of our European partners to allocate 90 billion for Ukrainian purposes. This shows that Europe is ready to support Ukraine on this way. The third task is further sanctions against Russia. Russia should be deprived of the resource to prosecute war further. Number four, providing Ukraine with necessary weapons. I believe that time will come when the American administration will understand that they should not just sell weapons to Ukraine, but should be provided with another package of military assistance the way the previous administration did. And definitely, this is about the unity within Ukraine. I believe that our government is proceeding with the negotiations correctly, and the key point in the negotiations is to be on the same page with American and European partners. So far, we've been successful in that. The war has been going on for 12 years. This is twice the time of a world war. He wanted to capture Ukraine in 2014 and in 2022, and he failed on both occasions. And he's not going to be able to capture Ukraine if we continue the way we've been doing so far, united and strong. The world order seems to have been crumbled, but we still can save it. And the only recipe for this is to make sure that Ukraine wins, and Ukraine will prevail.
It's really a pleasure, and let me welcome the ambassador of the United Kingdom, the ambassador of Canada, the ambassador of France, the ambassador of Germany, Denmark, General Petraeus, my friend. That's an amazing person. So we're going to have a panel discussion, and I expect that we will have a very open dialogue. We need to figure out how can we win in this war. During this session, we invited Deep State. These are very smart folks who actually monitor an entire battlefield, and they're going to give us a presentation, what's up on the battlefield, and what kind of forecast they project. So Ukraine is standing, Ukraine is fighting. And Ukraine's gonna win. And I really commend your support of our Western allies. And we are very grateful to every nation, Europeans and American people, who believe in Ukraine, who support Ukraine, and who want Ukraine to prevail in this war. Thank you. And я хотів би запросити Deep State на...
And I would like to invite the Deep State representatives to the stage with their presentation.
Всіх вітаю, друзі. Зараз на своїх екранах ви можете бачити QR-коди.
Greetings, everyone. You can see the QR codes with our presentation on the screen. If you want to see it closer than on the screens, please scan it. I'm Roman Pogorely, and this is Ruslan Mikula, the co-founder of this project. You probably are familiar with our maps and you use them in your work. Today we're going to speak about the situation on the battlefield, what are the plans of the enemy for the future, and what are our capabilities and possibilities. Greetings, everyone. 19.3% of the Ukraine territory occupied and 6.8% has been deoccupied. A lot of territories which were liberated were recaptured by the enemy again. 100% of Crimea is occupied, 99% of Luhansk Oblast, 78% of Donetsk region, 75% of Zaporizhia, and 72% of Kherson Oblast are under control of the enemy. So the dynamics of the occupation is like this. At this chart, you can see how Ukraine is losing territories from June 2024. So you can see on this chart how in the middle of the year the enemy was exhausted and short of manpower, but at the end of 2024 they gained momentum, and the peak of their offensive fell on November, when another 25% of the territory was lost. At that time, they were at the peak point, and we were on the verge. But luckily, the defense forces of Ukraine managed to make a breakthrough, and since November 2024, we observe a kind of downfall in the activities of the enemy. They were suffering from the lack of manpower. They used people with a lack of training and so on. At that period, we've figured out that they increased the payment for contracts, and as of May, they increased their manpower. In September, October, we managed to slow down the enemy, but in next November, they became more active, and in January, the monthly average rates was twice as low as they had previously had. President Trump and many in the administration of the U.S. would like to know these statistics. Previously, the Russians controlled 32% of the Donetsk Oblast. At the time when later they captured another 24% in 2023-2025 until now, for 3 years. The enemy captured 21.8% of this oblast, and 21.5% of the oblast is under Ukraine's control. So if we take the TAPO 2025, the enemy will need another 700 and, well, basically 2 more years to capture the entire oblast.
Алло? Сьогодні ми ще також поговоримо про ситуацію безпосередньо, яка проходить.
Today we'll also speak about the situation on the front line. If we get to the next slide, we'll see two towns, Pokrovsk and Mirnograd. Probably you've heard about these two towns for which the battles are going on. In fact, the Russians planned to capture them even before winter 2025, but they are lagging behind their plans, thanks to Ukrainian Defense Forces. And before they spoke about the 2 years, but in fact it will take even longer because there is a very heavy fighting for every point, every piece of land. And now we see that the northern outskirts of Pokrovsk and second town are still controlled by the Ukrainian Defense Forces. And Russians, having used more than 100,000 in these regions, still cannot cope with the Ukrainian Defense Forces around these places. Speaking about further developments, when these towns will fall, because sooner or later they will capture them, because the Russians have a huge potential for this, they will move deeper into Donetsk Oblast because they have to capture our logistics, not allow it to get to the next towns in which the general battle for Donetsk Oblast will take place. These are Slavyansk and Kramatorsk. You see red arrows currently, and this is just attempts by Russians to find out about our defense. They're looking for weak points. How could they enter these towns? And the fighting is going on the outskirts of these towns in Konstantinivka and Liman. It's a gateway to Slavyansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration, and those last remaining percentage of Donetsk Oblast, which Russians want to capture, and for which, according to our forecast, they would use not less than 2 years of fighting and lose a colossal amount of their forces and equipment. And then the question is, why should we give up this territory when Russians are losing fighting for this, and we are losing a lot? We can overcome them. The next area is Zaporizhzhia city and Zaporizhzhia Oblast. These are the territories which they illegally included into their constitution, and after Donetsk Oblast, they're going to fight for them. And recently, the Russian Chief of General Staff announced that the next battle will be for Zaporizhzhia, and you see the arrows and some other towns, Stepnohirsk and Katarinivka. They declared last year that they allegedly occupied them, but this shows how Russians are fighting now. What they say simply lies, because according to the Russian General Staff, they're standing there. There is just a little distance to Zaporizhzhia, and they are going to start fighting for that city. But this is not true. Ukrainian Defense Forces actively defend and do not allow them to move forward, but they're bringing about additional resources, strengthening their formations, and in the future we are going to have a big battle for Zaporizhzhia and Zaporizhzhia Oblast. Nearby there is a picture with Hulai Pole. It's an eastern flank of the Zaporizhzhia Oblast, from which they would try to move deeper into our territory in order to join the southern grouping. Then we'll continue about Kharkiv Oblast. It's an oblast which is not included into Russian constitution, and in Kharkiv and also Sumy and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. These are territories where they are moving in a chaotic manner. When they have opportunity, they make use of our weak points, our problems, and the further, the deeper they get into our territory, the stronger they will have position in negotiations for our territories, because they plan in the future to use Sumy, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kharkiv Oblast to use for exchange for Zaporizhzhia Oblast, and Kherson Oblast, and Donetsk Oblast, which is still under question mark. What are the major means Russians use for their implementing their plans besides infantry and armor? We may say that 2026 became the robotized war. Over the recent half a year, we used to say that those who will be ahead, who modernizes these drones, and reached optical fiber. And now the question is, the more such means somebody has, he will have the prevalence in the front line. Currently, these drones are used as logistical means, delivery of wounded soldiers. Now, currently, Ukraine is going ahead of Russians in the application of these robotized systems. And if we have enough political will, we'll continue increasing these means of fighting. For this, we need resources. Nearby, you see guided bombs, Shahed and Lancet. They use a lot of these means. And now the world faces the huge question how to counter guided bombs, because now it's extremely difficult to counter them. Now it's a challenge for the whole world. Russians are increasing their numbers. They are going to modernize them for them to be able to reach 100 kilometers deeper. You all know about Shaheds. Currently, Russians are ruining our country, using them not only on the front line, they are ruining our energy structure, civilian infrastructure, defense, and use them all over the territory of Ukraine. These are the means which deserve special attention, and we need to find counterbalance to them and increase the production of our own means. And the main recent problems of Russians in the front line, the first problem is huge losses and deficit of personnel. Yes, there are much more Russians than Ukrainians, but they're suffering heavy losses. And this is the demonstration of what Russians pay for capturing our territories. The next weak point of them is that they stopped using armor. We remember that at the beginning of full-scale advancement, they had all these armor columns. Now there is no massive use of armor. They use a light motorized equipment like buggies, motorbikes, and other lighter things. That means that for the enemy, deep breakthrough, it's a big problem. And the last, logistics. They planned to fight against NATO, United Kingdoms, United States, fight for their interests, but at the same time, the fifth year of this war, they cannot use normal equipment. They use donkeys, horses, and camels in order to deliver food and munitions. And in the end, I would like to say that it seems that we have lots of problems in our countries. It's very difficult for us. But at the same time, for the fourth year of full-scale invasion, we are standing against this huge country with huge resources. And then at the beginning of winter 22, they moved here using lots of tanks. And now this army has this, and this. Now we have to unite. We need resources, and having this big power will be able to counteract their power and their force. Thank you. I hope that you hear me. Dear friends, first of all, I would like to thank Ruslan Mikula and Roman Pogorely, co-founders of Deep State UA project, for this presentation, for a very brief, concise and clear picture of where we are. If we combine speech by Arseniy Yatsenyuk, the head of the Kyiv Security Forum, and this information from Deep State, we see the depth of the history of war and current situation. And what our colleagues from Deep State said for this is very important, that Ukraine is fighting not only against one nuclear state, but against the club of nuclear states, and this country is using camels. We're very grateful to you for the interest to our event. I see very many people. For us, it's a big honor, and we're very pleased. I see that Ambassador Charlie is looking for his seat. I want him to find quickly his seat, because it's very important that our friends and participants be able to listen to the discussion, which today is going to be one of the most central for Ukraine and for the West.
My name is Danilo Lubkivsky. I'm director of the Kyiv Security Forum, and I'm privileged to moderate today's panel, which is of utmost importance for the Kyiv Security Forum audience and for all Ukrainian audience. Many Ukrainians will follow what we are going to discuss today. Canada's Prime Minister Mark Carney said in Davos that the strength of the less powerful begins with honesty. I hope that this is a promising beginning, a promising start for our honest and sincere discussion. So without any further ado, let me invite our distinguished panelists to this stage. First of all, I would like to invite our special guest, General Petraeus, our good friend and member of the Kyiv Security Forum Security Council. Sir, you're welcome. Former CIA director and former commander of the United States Central Command. I'm really happy to invite our guests. Pani Natalka Smots, Ambassador of Canada to Ukraine. Natalia, thank you for joining us. Ambassador Neil Crompton, Ambassador of the United Kingdom to Ukraine. Excellency, happy to see you. Ambassador Heiko Thoms, Ambassador of Germany to Ukraine. Ambassador, watch out. Ambassador Haël Bassier, Ambassador of the French Republic to Ukraine. Happy to see you, sir. And His Excellency Lars Olof Somdal Petersen, who is representative of Denmark in Ukraine. Charge. As I said, I'm delighted to moderate today's panel, and thank you very much for coming and for joining us. We Ukrainians are deeply grateful to your governments, to your nations, to your peoples, for standing with Ukraine. And it's hard to imagine our resistance without your support. Russia's war against Ukraine started not in 2022. Russia's war against Ukraine started in February 2014. As a deputy foreign minister at that time, I remember very well the beginning of that war. We value Western support enormously, but we also must say quite clearly, since 2014, Ukraine has made a massive investment into the Western security, massive contribution. For 12 years, Ukrainians have bought the West time to wake up, to understand, to prepare for a Russian threat that has never gone away. In these 12 years, the world has changed dramatically. And Europe today is not attacked by Putin alone. We see open contempt for sovereignty, territorial integrity, and international law. Vladimir Putin celebrates. President Xi Jinping watches with satisfaction. Lavrov now claims that Russia's occupation of Crimea is no different from the United States' claims regarding Greenland. How come? So this is the logic of force. This is the logic of might is right. And yet Russia cannot defeat Ukraine. As our colleagues from Deep State UA project made this assessment that Russia is too weak to conquer Ukraine militarily. But its main weapon today is psychological exhaustion. So let us begin with two core questions. Did the West respond correctly to Russia's aggression 12 years ago? And does the West respond correctly to Russia's aggression now? And I would like to start our conversation with my first question, which goes to Ambassador Heiko Thoms of Germany. Sir, I'm really happy that you join us, and I believe that you will make a great contribution into this discussion. So this is the question. I do remember the talks between Prime Minister Yatsenyuk and Chancellor Merkel in 2014, 15, and then later. Many critics of Chancellor Merkel said that her policy was a policy of appeasement. Looking back to 2014, what do you think? What West could have done better? And did the German society understand the catastrophe of the policy of appeasement which we witnessed and faced in 2014? You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much. And let me say, first and foremost, I'm very glad to be here, and thanks for the invitation, Arseny. This is just 1 week ahead of the Munich Security Conference, the Kyiv Security Forum. Difference is that Munich Security Conference is not yet in the basement. So, but it is a good preparation for this. Many of us will be there next week.
Never say never.
Yeah. So I think it's hard to criticize very bluntly decisions which have been taken 12 years ago. I know many of the actors personally who have been in the decision-making process. They can give good reasons why at the time the world presented itself to them the way it did, why they didn't take other decisions, but on the other hand, it's quite clear. Now with hindsight, there were certain junctures where we probably should have acted more decisively. I think that's not only true for the period 10, 11, 12 years ago. I believe that's maybe even true for today. I believe that we way too much let Putin fight the war that he wants to fight. So looking back the way you do now with your question is something that should give us something to think about also for today.
Thank you, sir. So what are the conclusions for today? Are we ready to respond correctly to Russia's threat? Does Europe understand what's going on?
I think that for a long time, I'm a German citizen. I've lived in Germany at times in the past 12 years. I know that there was not in broad German society an awareness of the acute threat we are under, but this is changing rapidly now. I believe that especially what has happened in the last 18 months, again, also on EU territory, things that we see in terms of hybrid warfare, cyber warfare, informational warfare, there's a growing awareness in my country now too, that this somehow needs to be taken extremely seriously. Chancellor has said already that we are not at war in Germany, but it's also not peace that we are in. So,
far from that, absolutely.
Absolutely. So I know that our Baltic colleagues, our Nordic colleagues, our Eastern European colleagues were aware of this way more than we were in Germany. I was myself at NATO between 2017 and 2020. I remember very vividly what I was told by my Eastern European Baltic colleagues at the time, which I understand a lot better nowadays. And things like drones over German airports, drones flying into Poland, incidents which look like sabotage and hybrid warfare also on German territory make us much more aware of the situation that we're in nowadays. There is a growing awareness. I can assure you that in the German political class, no matter what the color and the party affiliation is, the awareness is 100%.
I'm sorry to hear this, but actually as we go into the depth of the history of the 12th century, we actually understand that the West Germany was saved, actually protected, when the West clearly stated that West Germany is our. West Germany is under our protection. The European Union membership is a form of protection for Ukraine. And Chancellor Merz, with all due respect, since he is doing very well and he helps Ukraine a lot, he is a strong Ukrainian friend and advocate of Ukraine's European integration and membership. But Chancellor Merz rejected the very idea of having Ukraine on the 1st of January of 2027 as the EU member. So, is Berlin ready to act decisively to integrate Ukraine into the European Union as fast as possible?
Let me say three things just because you mentioned West Germany. One lesson from our history is that the question of you recognize something de facto or the euro is very important. We never recognized East Germany, the euro, and it took a few decades, but in the end we achieved the goal of reuniting the country. This is one lesson of history I'd just like to point at. Then secondly, I'd like to say as a German ambassador here, I've quite a good conscience when it comes to our support for Ukraine. I'm still working for securing more support for Ukraine because I believe it's necessary. It's actually in our interest to do even more than we're doing. But in this trailer at the beginning of this event, it was said, I don't know if the number is true, that total military assistance to Ukraine was $145 billion. I don't know if that's true, but what I know is true is that 55 billion up to this point have come from Germany. So this is substantial. I sometimes wish for more even. I wish also for more active support in certain areas. But this is going in the right direction. Thirdly, you ask about EU integration of Ukraine. I believe as a practitioner of European affairs. I've served in Brussels twice, once at the EU, once at NATO. I've done a lot of work on the European Union. I believe it's actually, friendship also needs honesty. And I believe it's just an honest assessment that the 1st of January 2027 would be, to say it as a diplomat, extremely ambitious. I don't think it's realistic because of the simple workload that you have to implement, the thousands and thousands of acts that you will have to do here in Parliament. And it's not only enough to enact a law, you also have to implement a law, and that takes time. Think about very simple things like pesticides in agriculture. If you implement EU agricultural legislation, you would have to switch your whole agricultural sector around. This needs time. It's just one thing. I was State Secretary in the Ministry of Finance. To implement the whole acquis, EU acquis in banking regulation, this takes time. What I believe is important is a quick process. We will do everything in our power to support Ukraine in this process, but the process is what is first and foremost also in Ukraine's interest, because this will reform the country up to a point that will be very much in the interest of each and every single Ukrainian citizen. I see there's absolutely no reason why Ukraine shouldn't be taking the same route as Poland. When Poland joined the European Union, it had 25% of German GDP per capita. Now Poland is at 55% of German GDP per capita. In the early 2030s, Poland will be at 90% of German GDP per capita. And absolutely the same should be true for Ukraine and can be true for Ukraine. I believe Ukraine's place really is inside the European Union, and we should make it happen as soon as possible.
Wonderful, wonderful. I do thank you, Ambassador, for these words. So Now let me turn to the ambassador of the French Republic. Thank you, sir, for being with us. As you know, as all of us follow these days, we know that so-called peace talks in Abu Dhabi have been completed, as they say. So the next turn will be somewhere in the States, if I'm not mistaken. We would be happy to know how Paris assesses, how does Paris assess the progress which was achieved during these conversations, these talks, and do you consider this, do you take these talks seriously?
Thank you. Did it work? Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, of course, we take these talks very seriously. They have a great utility and that they exist, actually. So since October, November last year, there is a great acceleration, and you see all these diplomatic meetings. There are the Abu Dhabi talks. There is also a very high number of meetings of the Coalition of the Willing in France, in UK, in Germany. And all this is, of course, very good, and it goes hand in hand. Question is, how far can it go? And this depends mainly on one thing, and this is Russia really willing to negotiate in reality? And I mean, it's okay to have some doubts on that, actually, when you see that President Putin continues to strike energy facilities in Ukraine. Clearly, the will is to understanding that the military situation is pretty not moving in reality, and that Russia pays a huge cost for that. Obviously, the will is to put pressure on the population itself, which actually is a war crime in reality. So does that mean that there is no chance to come to a conclusion? I don't know. But it certainly means that there seems to be no strong pressure on Russia to find an agreement soon, and that for the time being, they seem to be rather enjoying continuing this situation at least until spring. So we do need to take this seriously, and we support this process, and we think that actually something good can come out of it. We contribute to this by providing some security guarantees as France, as EU members, as Coalition of the Willing members, and certainly we are ready to engage in this. And at the same time, at one point, obviously, we are here to help. We are also here to contribute to the prosperity package through the Commission and the EU and all this. But at some point, we have to be in the room, because we cannot, nobody can say what we should do without us. So at some point, we will have to be in that room and to see how we could actually push that forward. Our aim is to support Ukraine and to give Ukraine the stronger possible hand into these negotiations. But this said, it pretty much depends on Russian stubbornness and on the ability together of both of Europe and the US to increase pressure on Russia, actually.
That's an interesting, I do thank you, Ambassador, for these remarks. And there is yet an interesting development if we talk about the so-called peace talks. The diplomatic advisor of your president visited Moscow recently. Lavrov says, war criminal Lavrov says that there are some kind of, secret talks with European leaders that are ongoing in Moscow. So would you be so kind to elaborate on this and to share with us what was actually discussed in Moscow, and what are your conclusions, and what actually was achieved during these talks?
Thank you. So how to say this? First and foremost, it has been always very clear for us and for the French president, and they say that publicly, that we are not speaking with Russians anymore, not because we found that it was impossible to speak with them, but we found that it was not useful, that nothing could come out of it. And this is why for a long time there was no contact whatsoever. It did happen in the past, actually, that there were some exceptions to this. For example, French president did call all members of P5, permanent members of the UN Security Council, in July 2025 because of Iran. So he called President Putin to discuss the situation in Iran. And of course, he also raised the issue of Ukraine, because we have to restate our position. So now our situation is slightly different, because actually there is always diplomatic activity. There is this process led by the US, and we support this process. At the same time, at one point, it will be important to have also a channel for us with the Russians because we have our own security, which is at stake, and we have also interest and also in providing security to Ukraine. And this will have to be addressed with Russians at some point. So we are not there yet. For the time being, what happened is only to an opening of a channel which was closed for a long time, so it's opened again. But for the time being, this is it, and there was no negotiation, there was no breakthrough, it was just about reopening a channel. This channel is now open, and we think that it will remain open if we think that it's useful. And for the time being, this is the situation. May I add that, of course, when we do that, it was, we warn our partners in advance, and in particular, President Zelensky and Ukraine. There is no surprise in this, right? And this was discussed with them earlier. And then, of course, there were some debriefs, of course, of this official debriefs, rather than what I'm doing here, which is fine too. So we are all trying to push into the same direction here.
Excellency, sounds very reasonable for me. You know, what we hear from the press, from different reports that we receive here at the Kyiv Security Forum, that there is some kind of thinking behind the what may be called results of the so-called, peace talks perspective. So there are 20 points to be decided or discussed. And there is some kind of extravaganza in that thinking, that the United States is going to sign something with Ukraine, then they are going to sign something with Russia. I mean, and Europe should accept what the United States is going to sign with other parties. I mean, how do you like it? And what's your take on this? I mean, should Europe participate in these conversations?
Well, I think I already mentioned that slightly, but let me come back to this. Of course, Europe and we Europeans, and I don't want to speak for other Europeans in the room, but we all want to help, and we want to help strengthen the hand of Ukraine into these negotiations, provide security guarantees, provide a prosperity package, provide every kind of reassurance that can be provided, including the possibility of a deployment of multinational force of a coalition of a willing inside the framework of a ceasefire. So we are completely ready to do this, but of course, it depends of the whole package, because of course, the more Ukraine will have to face some difficult choices, the most important must be the security guarantees, because you have a balance here. And of course, we have to be fully associated with that. So it's true that right now there is a bit of an uneven situation where actually this discussion is going on between the Americans, Russia, and Ukraine without us. And all what we are saying is, well, we are here to help. We want to contribute. And at some point, if Ukraine in particular think that it is useful that we would contribute, well, we have to be in.
I do thank you. And now I turn to Ambassador of the United Kingdom. Thank you very much, sir, for being with us. And I will continue with the questions that are important for the Ukrainian, not only Ukrainian, but the international audience as well. And the question is simple. In your opinion, because you have this very peculiar angle of, from which you may give your standpoint, what must Europe do to be taken seriously?
It's a big question, and actually being in Ukraine sort of makes us in Britain feel more European. I think sort of the lesson of the last year has been that Europe needs to invest more in hard power, build a bit more strategic autonomy. We've been in a long-standing and very productive relationship with the United States since the Second World War. I think we all recognize times are changing. Sometimes we overinterpret this and attribute it to President Trump. I think President Trump has his own style. I spent a number of years in Washington, and when you're in Washington, you used to think let's differentiate between kind of what the immediate administration is saying and what the long-term trend is. And I think it's a fact that every U.S. president since John F. Kennedy has told Europe we ought to spend more on our defense. You know, under President Obama, they talked very openly about the need to, United States' desire to rebalance from Europe to Asia. And I think, you know, we've been a bit slow to react to that. I think the way that Heiko said, I think sort of Putin's actions in Ukraine have been a wake-up call. I think, regrettably, have been a wake-up call since 2022 rather than since 2014. And I think sort of President Trump has brought a different approach. The old rules-based order feels a little weaker than it did 2 years ago. Not just because of, you know, what's happening in the United States, but the way Russia has behaved, China has behaved, and the like. So I think what's happening in Europe is a recognition that we need to take responsibility for our own security. I think there's a political awareness that Ukrainian security and European security are now indivisible. You know, we have trends in Europe too. I think European investment in defense has of the NATO members of Europe has increased 50% since 2019. So that preceded 2022, but obviously that process has accelerated over the last year. There were very important commitments made at the Hague summit last year. I know what's happening in my own government. I think what's happening in Germany in the last year or two, both in the politics and expenditure, is sort of epochal in my professional experience. So I think we need to invest more. We want to preserve the relationship with the United States. We feel stronger because of it. It's served us well. But I think we need to take more responsibility and invest both in our defense budget, but also building up our military industrial capabilities. And I think those things are happening. We see, you know, groups within Europe and within NATO, particularly around the Baltic countries, sort of coordinating more tightly. UK and France have been very involved in discussions of the coalition and the willing to try and position us so that Europe can play an important role in security guarantees. And I think that when I take a long-term view of the United States, Europe is responding to what successive US presidents have done, and I hope that will actually strengthen our relationship.
So we talk about more strategic autonomy for Europe. Do you think it relates to the nuclear dimension? Yesterday, the New START treaty expired. Medvedev, war criminal Medvedev, directly says that a new nuclear winter is coming. Is London afraid?
Afraid is the wrong word, but I think we're open-eyed about the risks that we face from Russia. And I think that one of the things that's going on, I don't want to speak for France, but in London, they're talking again about firstly ensuring our nuclear deterrent is as modern as it can be. Should we only, at the moment, we rely on submarines? Should we have more than one mechanism in the discussion with our French friends and others within NATO about whether or not we can provide, a tactical nuclear weapon support to NATO? So I think it's open-eyed. I think that what's happened since 2022 has refocused strategic thinkers in UK and Europe on the need to restore deterrence and how we do that. And clearly, there's a nuclear dimension to that, but our first choice would be to do this through very strong conventional forces and through strong and robust diplomacy of the sort, which I think Europe has done on issues like sanctions and cutting its economic ties with Russia.
Thank you, sir. By the way, not to forget that I would like to congratulate you on the first anniversary of the 100-year cooperation agreement that Ukraine and the United Kingdom signed a year ago. So, there is a lot of symbolism in the very title of that agreement. So it means that there is a strong stance and actually that we are sure that both the United Kingdom and Ukraine will survive. We will go through all these challenges. And here comes the Budapest Memorandum thing and the memories of the Budapest Memorandum and the memories of the security assurances that were translated in Ukraine as the security guarantees. And now we know that the Financial Times unveiled some details, as they say, I have no idea, is it true, of the collective security guarantees that are being promised to Ukraine. Do you think this is credible? I mean, do you think that these collective guarantees that are being discussed diplomatically, politically, they will provide what is actually needed? The only thing which is needed is to make sure that Putin understands that he cannot move on.
Yes, I think they can be made. I mean, I think there are two things. Firstly, when we talk about security guarantees, we're diplomats. You know, we want to see a negotiated solution. We believe there has to be a negotiated solution. But I think we all understand, you know, your lesson of Budapest, indeed the Minsk process. Ukrainians need to know that if they are going to make peace and make compromises for peace, they need to be 100% sure that Russia won't attack again, or if Russia attacks again, they're not going to be on their own. And I think that's understood, and I think that's understood in my capital, and I think it's understood in other capitals in Europe. You know, I think Mark Rutte was here this week. I think it was very important that the NATO Secretary General was talking to the Rada, and I thought he set out probably more politically than anyone has before. You know, clearly the first element of security guarantees is a really strong Ukrainian military capability. You have it. You have the largest army in Europe. You have the most combat experience. We're all learning from you. You've learned to innovate brilliantly. You've changed the nature of warfare. We, as your allies and friends, need to ensure that you can properly finance that. You can properly re-equip and modernize your forces and make sure that you can buy the weapons you need rather than the weapons we can perhaps spare, as I think we could criticize us for in the last few years. But I think it needs to be a European dimension, a number of European forces. Countries have committed to deploying troops here, both to help with training, but I think send a political signal to Putin. Surprise. Rutte's phrase was some in the air, some on the ground, and some ships in the Black Sea. And then with the US backstop, and it's not for me to talk to the US backstop, but we know that the US brings both a unique sense of deterrence and power. So I think we've made good progress on that, and I think that actually the other strong element of the diplomatic process since November has been that there's a clearer idea about the future economic and political relationship that Ukraine will have with Europe and the United States, including European Union membership. Not for me to say when, but I think that sends a powerful signal. And you mentioned our 100-year partnership. We're no longer members of the European Union, although we strongly support the idea of Ukraine joining, because I think that's a political signal that you're not in the Soviet space. But I think our 100-year partnership, which is a bit intimidating for me, is that we don't have a 100-year partnership with any other country in the world, I think is our way of saying that we see beyond the war and we want to be friends with Ukraine. Not just friends with Ukraine, but partners, and we want to do things with you and share university students and share, you know, technological projects and learn from your experience in the military sphere.
Thank you, sir. I do understand, I do believe, applauses. I do believe that the European Union misses the United Kingdom. If I may, I trust that after Ukraine joins the European Union, the United Kingdom can reconsider and maybe think about getting back. Okay,
no
I'm kidding, and I'm trying then to move to some wider picture, what we all are interested in. And this great picture definitely includes Canada. Natalko, I started by quoting your Prime Minister, who had, you know, a remarkable, outstanding speech in Davos. He actually said what everybody thinks, and he told this directly. President Trump didn't like it. So, your Prime Minister has said that the global order is shaking. President Trump continues to insult Canada, to provoke Canada. Media report some contacts between the United States administration with the, as they call them, the so-called Canadian separatists. I'm not sure if that's true, but if that's true, what does it mean? So, my question is very simple, but difficult. How Canada, you know, goes on with all this pressure?
Thank you for having me here. I think I am I am the only non-European country here, besides the general. So, yes, it's a good question. So all Canadians were very proud of our Prime Minister in that moment. And I agree, I think the speech resonated with many other countries, in particular if you happen to be not one of the great powers. So Canada proudly is a middle power. And Second World War was very important for Canada because we understood that we were not a dominant power and very unlikely to be a dominant power. We're relatively small in terms of population. So we turned instead to influence. And we made use of that influence. And we also understood the power for Canada in terms of alliances. Having good friends is very important. And so we invested a lot in NATO, the UN system, strong alliances. And maybe over the last few years, we've let that slip. And I think what the Prime Minister was saying is that we woke up and we understand that things have shifted. That doesn't mean that we don't believe in those things. We do. In fact, we believe in them more than ever. And those alliances are very critical. And I think that there's a lot of similarity with Ukraine in this moment. Ukraine is turning into a very important global influential power and a very important alliance for all of us. So there's a lot that middle powers can do, right? I think that we understand that having all of our resources come together makes a much larger pool to support Ukraine and the effort. We understand that at still whether it's at the UN or elsewhere, speaking with one voice as much as possible. I think Ukraine senses all of us as an alliance and trusts that we're there, and we've proven that over and over again. And you see that in the military training, you see that in the coming together with the coalition of the willing, you see that in the security guarantees that I believe that are supporting Ukraine. So in the day that there will be, in the event that there will be a ceasefire, then we are there as strong allies. So I believe this is what the Prime Minister was communicating.
You are talking about strong allies, and I cannot agree more. But I also cannot but mention an elephant which is in the room. And this is not the United States, it's China. You have a very interesting track of relations with China. Your Prime Minister visited, if I'm not mistaken, visited China. The UK Prime Minister visited China. Everyone visits China. So how would you explain your relationship with China and China's possible role in all these very difficult and intense geopolitical game?
How does that expression go? Keep your friends close, keep your enemies closer, I believe. I think it's been an important step for Canada to make peace with countries. And there's a bit of a thawing there with China. I think it was important. Remember, Canada also is a country of diasporas representing every part of the world. We have a strong diaspora from Asia as well. They are very important economic partners for us. So I think this was an important step to make. You'll notice that our Prime Minister, our Foreign Minister are investing a lot in the Middle East, for example, in Asia. And we recognize that we need to diversify our own economy. And Asia, Middle East are very important partnerships for us to diversify to. So this includes Saudi Arabia, for example, and others. So it's just the reality for Canada right now, and we are focused on exactly that. So we're focused on diversity, strengthening alliances, and mending fences.
Thank you, Natalia. So this is just a reality. This is the reality. And now I turn to our good friend from Denmark, since this reality, stands before you, in your opinion, can what I call the normal world, the world of media power, middle powers, as Prime Minister of Canada put it, actually, can all our countries protect Ukraine, Greenland, and ultimately our future? What's your take? What's the take of your government?
Yes.
Very good. I mean,
I think,
that's a good answer.
but it probably needs also an elaboration,
You're welcome.
because I completely agree with colleagues on this panel that it's been a wake-up call, and we also need to finish the coffee and get out the door. And that has been the policy for Denmark for the past few years as well, to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom, European freedom, as much as possible, and at the same time getting ready in our own, on our own terms for whatever may come. So our Minister for Defense announced this morning that Denmark will in 2026 achieve the NATO spending target of 3.5%, or reach 3.5% towards the 5% target. This will be the first time we achieve that. Part of that is increased support for Ukraine. So at the same time, he announced an additional 400 million euros in support for Ukraine in 2026 on the military and defense side of things. And I think herein lies the answer to whether we can, whether we will be able to. It's actually the example of Ukraine and the example of the cooperation that we have around and with Ukraine, and all of the lessons we can take away from our Ukrainian friends and partners that will make us able to withstand whatever we will have to withstand, and we are ready for it.
I do thank you. And I trust that everyone would support me in this audience when saying that, we all support Denmark, and we feel strong solidarity with you. Denmark belongs to those nations who are the champions of solidarity and understanding of Ukraine. And we highly appreciate, and I trust, and I'm sure for 100%, that Ukraine will stand with you, stand tall with you against any attempt to ruin the world order, to ruin the basic principles of the international law and the principles of territorial integrity and sovereignty. I believe that all these things unite us all here at this stage. So be strong, and we are with you. Don't be afraid, we are.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, I do appreciate. So now I turn to our special guest, General Petraeus, and we are going to discuss two core questions. First of all, thank you, sir, for being with us, being here in Kyiv, being here in Ukraine, and we value this very much. My first question is, how do you assess the overall situation on the front, taking into account what our colleagues from the deep state UA told us, and how do you see the perspective?
Well, first of all, let me thank Prime Minister Yatsenyuk for once again pulling together a very intellectually stimulating gathering. I am very proud to be a member of your board, of the Kyiv Security Forum board, and I also want to begin by saluting not just the Ukrainian military, although I do that and have the greatest of admiration for them, but also to salute the Ukrainian people. We know very well what they have endured this winter, a particularly cold winter. I should note, in fact, that at midnight 2 nights ago, I was out with a drone interceptor unit. They were conducting training. And the bone-chilling cold is something I haven't experienced in many, many years. I think probably since I was going through ranger school in the dead of winter on a mountain in North Georgia. What the Ukrainian people have done, the determination, the fortitude, the creativity really is hugely impressive. We're just ending my 9th trip to Ukraine since 2022, and I should note that I was first in Ukraine when it was still a member of the Soviet Union. It was a historic visit by the Chief of Staff of the U.S. Army, who was making the first visit to the Soviet Union since General George C. Marshall went to Yalta, and it was quite a historic occasion. And to see what has happened in Ukraine since that time is truly remarkable, and again, another source of enormous admiration. This was a really great trip because we got to meet with General Syrskyi. We separately met with his deputy. We went out, as I said, for drone training in the middle of the night. We went to the Air Defense Operations Center, which has just been established. We were there on the first day that it's set up, and it is hugely, hugely impressive. Deputy head of the President's Office, the DTEC CEO, and learned about the extraordinary challenges, of course, in detail, of the damage to the electrical grid, what they are doing to get it back online, the issues that many people are going to have to deal with for quite some time, given the enormous destruction that has been wrought. 2 different drone units, and each time we are here, we visit with the same unit, Nemesis, and to watch its evolution has been extraordinary as well. The first time I visited, they were a battalion, then they became a regiment. They are now a brigade and growing steadily. They operate on ground, in the air, and at sea. We also met with leaders of the 3rd Corps, the Snake Island Institute, other drone facilities, and so forth. And to watch every few months what has taken place is really a joy for an old soldier to see the creativity, the initiative, the independent action, and the rest of it. How do I see the situation? I see it the way the Wall Street Journal does in an editorial that they published earlier in this week, that Putin is not winning. I really strongly believe that that is the case. And let me just supplement a little bit of what the deep state had to say, and I agree wholeheartedly with their assessment. At sea, how does a country that has no navy sink nearly 40% of the Black Sea Fleet and then force the Black Sea Fleet to tie up all its ships at a port in southeast Black Sea as far from Ukraine as they can get? And oh, by the way, Ukrainian drones even got into that port and heavily damaged a submarine. How did they do it? Again, incredible Ukrainian innovativeness, some intelligence help, I suspect, to identify where the ships were, aerial drones that pinpoint their location, and maritime drones that sink them. And you'll recall that it started quite auspiciously, or inauspiciously for the Russians, with the sinking of their very flagship, the Moskva, the pride of the Russian fleet. So at sea, you've seen extraordinary achievements. In Russia itself, Ukraine is very much taking the fight to Russia, focusing very heavily on critical military infrastructure, in particular refineries, storage facilities for fuel, and so forth. And I am keenly looking forward to seeing the Flamingo. This is the cruise missile that it has a greater range than the U.S. cruise missile that was under discussion, quite a bit greater. It's 3,000 kilometers as published, and has a larger warhead. And again, another example of Ukrainian industrial might and design and so forth. And that is going to cause enormous damage as the production of it scales up. And we met with the individuals that actually do that particular production. The same as the shorter range one, which is also coming into big production. We mentioned about the ceasefire talks. I think that was entirely predictable. I think, by the way, that Ukraine has demonstrated extraordinary skill and willingness to make some compromises while still establishing some red lines because of your constitution and so forth when it comes to if there was going to be land swapped for some other objective. What has happened here, I hope, is that the United States will finally recognize that Vladimir Putin has no intention of negotiating a true ceasefire, allowing the kind of security guarantees that are so essential. And I salute here our European friends who have played such a key role in designing the security measures, the guarantees for Ukraine, even bringing the United States into it in terms of monitoring a cessation of hostilities and confirming violations if that is the case. I would hope that, again, when Medvedev, when Putin, when the others state that they still insist on their core demands, which are outrageous, of course, essentially demilitarizing Ukraine, being given the land, the fortified cities that they aren't even going to be able to get to for quite some time, much less actually conquer. And I'm sure they'd love to see President Zelensky replaced by a pro-Russian figure. None of those can be acceptable to Ukraine, and I know that they are not. So what could happen here? How could this, you know, I somewhat famously forgot that I had an embedded reporter with me when we were doing the fight to Baghdad when I was a young division commander of the 101st Airborne Division. And I was watching the various assumptions that we'd been given invalidated one by one. And I finally turned to my reporter and I said, tell me how this ends. And I can actually, and by the way, I heard that question at every single congressional hearing until finally after the surge in Iraq, we showed how it could end. In this case, I think there actually is a unique opportunity right now. Russia is much more fragile economically, society, I think, as well. You're watching the sentiment turn against it. I also met with your Foreign Intelligence Service chief, who's terrific, and we meet with him, and Gore every time we're here as well. Their National Welfare Fund is going to run out of money this year. India is going to buy much less gas and oil. They're beginning to taper it down already, part of the agreement on tariffs with the United States. The EU has set a price, so they're getting much less revenue. They're sustaining enormous damage to their energy facilities in particular. They're running out of money. Interest rates are exceedingly high. There's going to be no investment based on loans in that country. Inflation is running very, very high, and I think they're in a very difficult position. And if, in the wake of the negotiations, we realize that Putin is not serious about it, it's time for the United States to approve the sanctions package that Senator Lindsey Graham has 90 co-sponsors out of 100 senators. You should know that the United States Congress and the US people are strongly, strongly behind Ukraine. And even as you see some of the actions taken by the executive branch, in particular, of course, getting Europeans to meet the security requirements for their own continent to a much greater degree. And you do have to, I think, give President Trump considerable credit. You obviously have to give President Putin considerable credit since he's the greatest gift to NATO since the end of the Cold War, tragically. But if the sanctions are done now, the EU is already looking at a 20th round of sanctions. The EU, very impressively, after lots of wrangling, approved a 90 billion euro support package for Ukraine, which is a game changer. That'll solve Ukraine's economic and fiscal challenges for at least a year and a half and probably allow the production of drones to double and lots of good effects out of that. And then start to convince Putin that, you know what, he can't outsuffer the Ukrainians, the Europeans, and the Americans, and that he is going to need a cessation of hostilities. Certainly we should do more to help Ukraine in particular when it comes to anti-air and ballistic missile defense. That is a shortcoming that is very difficult to overcome, but Ukraine is overcoming just about everything else. Again, as I said, Ukraine this year probably will produce 7 million drones. They change the software on a near weekly basis, and they change the hardware every few weeks. There's never been a procurement system like this. Now this process in Ukraine is producing tomorrow's technology for today's war, in contrast to the system that we're saddled with in the United States. Yes, it does F-35s and aircraft carriers, but it often has such a long process that you end up with yesterday's technology for tomorrow's wars, and we need to be learning from Ukraine in that regard. So I actually do think there is a unique opportunity right now, given the greater fragility of the Russian economy, the greater support by the EU and the European NATO members, and certainly, and by the way, in Congress, in the National Defense Authorization Act, there is funding for Ukraine for each of the next 2 years. There are also restrictions on any drawdown of U.S. forces in Europe and also, by the way, in Korea. So I don't think that this is any kind of fantastical vision here. I think this is actually reasonable if we all take the additional actions to help Ukraine stop the Russians cold on the front lines and also help Ukraine do better against missiles and drone swarms, and then do more to really hurt the Russian war economy, including, by the way, in the sanctions package, are secondary sanctions on countries that provide the components to Russia, and of course that is China, providing enormous quantities of chips, of brushless motors, of, again, all of the different components that are necessary for the military-industrial complex. So again, I am very much with the Wall Street Journal that Putin is not winning.
It's a great vision. Sir, I thank you very much for this encouraging message that you are sending the Kyiv Security Forum audience. But here, you know, in my opinion, that the only thing that can save Russia from their failure, which is upcoming, is a political turmoil within the United States. And I cannot but put this question, since all of us are wondering what's going on in the United States. Ivan Krastev, a famous European...
Not much.
Not much.
I mean, the Super Bowl's coming up on Sunday.
You know, contrary to
Patriots
that,
are back in the Super Bowl.
Ivan Krastev, a famous European intellectual, he put it quite clearly. Let me quote. He said that due to the actions what we see today, the concept of America first increasingly sounds like America alone. I mean, where are you going?
Well, I think that's much overreading the situation. Look, if you look at the greater sweep of history in the United States, we have had periods of turmoil before. I'm old enough to remember the late 1960s and early 1970s when the demonstrations often turned into riots against the Vietnam War. There were race issues. There was generally a rejection of authority in all forms. And that stayed with us well into the mid-1970s. There was regrouping and so forth. And if you go back further, there have been other periods, obviously, of considerable challenge. There's no question that there is a degree of polarization in Washington in particular. There is considerable partisanship. And sure, we have a president who has a different negotiating style, certainly, than some of his predecessors. He truly does believe in flexing every muscle that you possibly can, intimidate the person with whom you're going to negotiate, and frankly, and he says this in his book, punch the other guy in the nose before you even sit down to negotiate. And so you just have to, again, understand a bit of that. So we have to keep this in context very much. There also will be midterm elections coming up in early November. The betting right now is that the House of Representatives will flip from Republican to Democrat. That will bring back some of the checks and balances that have not been as present in the first year because of the executive branch and the House and the Senate being all in Republican hands, and a president willing to wield the power of his movement, the MAGA movement, and the rest of that. But I would just caution, often said during the first term, okay, read the tweets, now the truths, but then follow the troops, follow the money, and follow the policy. And again, if you read carefully the National Defense Authorization Act, U.S. is not going to draw down at anything substantial in Europe because Congress will not let that happen. Certainly there does need to be a continued rebalance to the Indo-Pacific. And frankly, this administration, I think in many respects rightly, has put more emphasis certainly on controlling what was largely unchecked flow of illegal immigrants into the United States, and also doing a bit more in our own hemisphere. And for what it's worth, I'll leave the debate on international law to others, but there's no other country in the world that could have carried out that operation in Venezuela, not remotely. And I'm very familiar with the capabilities of all the countries on stage here and the others from 37 years in uniform and commanding 2 wars, and thanks to the countries here who provided their troops for that. That operation, by the way, was much dicier than people realize. There was a lot more really significant action. I'm not sure how many know it, but the lead helicopter, which was one of the special operations large Chinook helicopters, the pilot took 3 rounds in the leg. The aircraft was quite heavily shot up, and he stuck the landing. The special operators got out. Keep in mind that there were 30+ Cuban special operations forces augmenting the security detail of the president of Venezuela, and they were all killed. That's a lot of serious shooting. That's a lot of firefight. And the fact that we could come out of that with basically, I think it was 5 or 6 individuals wounded, only one of those fairly seriously, is truly nothing short of breathtaking. It involved the synchronization of all capabilities. I've emphasized this because the U.S. military, which is probably going to have $1 trillion budget this year, and with great respect to Europeans, and I very much applaud the increase to 3.5%, and countries already meeting it, like Denmark, which I think has also been one of the staunchest supporters of Ukraine, literally gave all of its artillery to Ukraine early on in the war. But at the end of the day, the reality still is that the United States just doesn't spend on defense more than all NATO countries put together. It spends more than twice as much as all of them. And so the U.S. is indispensable to NATO, and I'd say that having had 1, 3, and 4-star NATO positions, always dual-headed as an American. So let me say one thing, though, that I think really all of our countries need to take to heart, and that is that I don't believe that we and our allies are anywhere near as assiduous as we should be in learning from the war in Ukraine, and in particular, from Ukraine's innovation. As an aside, by the way, the economy in the U.S. is very solid. We're predicting increased real GDP growth this year. And by the way, innovation in the United States, productivity gains, are the highest by far in our lifetimes. They are extraordinary, and it makes the U.S. still the country, the destination for investment of choice. But the future of war is taking place here in Ukraine. I mentioned Ukraine will produce 7 million drones this year, using 9,000 or 10,000 a day. We produce 300,000 drones in the United States right now, the arsenal of democracy. And we all have got to recognize what's going on here. We need to correct our concepts for how we will operate, change the organizational structures. Of course, Ukraine has now not only an Army, Navy, Air Force, but an unmanned systems force, and now a cyber force as well. We need to overhaul how we train, how we educate our leaders. Obviously, the material requirements have to be adjusted in procurement, and then a variety of other actions. We are not doing this fast enough. We should be transforming our forces and learning from what the extraordinary military forces of Ukraine have already done and what they are continuing to do, because this is the future, and this is the key to how a country with 1/5 the population of its invader, and probably 1/10 or 1/12 the economy, has been able to do so magnificently on the battlefield.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, and thank you for being with us and for visiting Ukraine, saying that you stand with Ukraine. So this is very important for the Kyiv Security Forum and for the overall Ukrainian audience.
Well, in my introduction, I was hoping that you were going to note that I was sanctioned by Vladimir Putin in September of 2022. I'm very proud of that. I did add it. I did add it to my CV.
That's very good. As we approach the end of our conversation, I would like to raise, to put the final question, which would be addressed to all of you. Putin has been in power in Russia for already 26 years. 26 years. For nearly half of that time, Putin has been waging a direct war against Ukraine. Can you imagine? Half of his time he spent simply just to wage a war against Ukraine. Not Russia, not Russian problems, simply Ukraine. And, the question comes from that what makes us believe that he is going to stop this war? So my final question is, what comes next? And I believe that we will start from Lars. You're welcome.
I think what comes next will, of course, to a large extent, be determined by what Ukraine does and what the partners of Ukraine do. And here, we as Denmark, we still believe very much in transatlantic unity, and we are working as hard as we can with all of our partners and friends to have the readiness, the resilience, and the force and the capabilities to be effective deterrents and to have a response if ever a response would be needed. And in that sense, I'm encouraged. And I'm encouraged by the serious work that we have all done as friends and partners of Ukraine and all of the work that Ukraine is doing. And I would only encourage that across sectors that we promote and continue this collaboration. And not least when it comes to the question of reforms and the prospects for EU integration. Set your own timeline, set your own tempo, keep up the pace. We are there to support.
Thank you. Natalia, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. So just an observation. It seems to me and to many others that part of the reason why President Putin has to be in wars because we see his popularity dip when he's not. There's a direct correlation, it seems, that when he is in a war setting or state, his popularity rises. I lived in Moscow for 3 years in 2004, yes. And at that time, we believed that Russia was actually on the path to democracy. And then you saw the shift. But not only does his popularity seem to increase when he's in a state of war, but what we've also seen is a real serious concentration of power. So Russia as a country, as a population, I believe is really suffering. And we're seeing the reverse of what's happening in Ukraine. So I was here when Yanukovych was in power. And we believed that Ukraine was going to be on the decline, and we saw the opposite. So I guess the lesson there is we don't know what's going to happen around the corner, but there's two things I would just like to add. One is that all of us here do not want coercion to be the new world order. That would be a tragedy to every single one of us. We understand that well. And the second point I want to leave is when you look at the survey that we saw even with the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology that was released very recently, we cannot lose sight of where Ukrainians' mentality is. So they've made it clear that They're behind their president, right? They do not, over 50% do not want to give up territory. So if you ask the Ukrainians themselves what they want to do, and they're saying, no, we need to move into Russia to fight in terms of long-range weapons. So while there's a belief that this energy crisis was intentional to suppress, lose the resilience, lose sort of the hope for Ukrainians, we see every time they're hit hard, they get stronger, tougher, and more determined to fight for their democracy and to push harder. So that's a lot to celebrate. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalia. Heiko, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, we are all asking ourselves whether this year there will be a just and lasting peace. I'm sometimes concerned that there may be a peace which is not just and lasting, but I also think that there is a much higher probability that there simply won't be peace. I'm wondering how anyone can believe that Putin actually wants peace. He certainly wants victory or his preliminary military objectives being handed to him on a silver platter. But if that's not the case, he will continue. What the general talked about, the possibility of an implosion of the regime. At some point, if we hold out, this is going to happen. I was in finance before. I believe that you have to have a close look at the banking system. There is certain vulnerabilities there. And I believe our policy should be to actually contribute to those vulnerabilities, make them feel the price. I believe that we have the means to do that we have more means to do that. And I can assure you that Germany will be firmly standing on Ukraine's side.
Thank you. Neil, you're welcome.
Thank you. You're right. I mean, after 26 years, we should know. I remember being in Washington when John McCain was running for president. He memorably said, I looked into Putin's eyes, I saw 3 letters. He said, KGB. So, you know, I'm a diplomat. We have to play the game of negotiations. We have to keep talking. We have to explore. But I think, you know, in the UK, we agree with the government of Ukraine that Putin will only negotiate seriously if he's put under a lot more pressure. I think the battlefield pressure's taking place in the way that General Petraeus and the deep state people set out. We need to increase economic pressure through sanctions. We need to become more imaginative. I think that there is a good case, as the general said out, that Russia's strategic position is weakening. You know, the sort of quite remarkable statistic that Ukraine is now killing 10,000 more soldiers a month than Russia can recruit could become a political problem for Putin. I think Ukraine has a very important role. The Russians spend billions on disinformation, and they're fantastic at creating this narrative, and we just got traction, you know, in different parts of the world that Ukrainian defeat is inevitable. I think Ukraine has done a good job of resisting that. There's a good article in, I think, Foreign Affairs I read this morning, you know, since 2014, Russia has advanced 30 miles, you know, at the cost of 1.2 million soldiers. The most powerful thing I saw over the Christmas period was President Zelensky going to Kupiansk. And I saw, you know, one of these Bellingcat or social media sites that said that he was approximately 1.25 kilometers from the front line, which then some wag said, which is approximately the distance that Putin sits from Gerasimov when he talks to him over the length of his table. But I think setting out your strategy in the way that the sort of, in a sense, the new top team is doing is very powerful. And then with Europe and America responding in the ways that we've been talking about, I think that's what's next. And then we might get to a position where it becomes a political problem inside Russia that Putin feels he has to negotiate. And Ukraine can feel that they can go into a negotiation knowing that they won't face this problem again.
Thank you, Neil. Gael, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Well, I think that there is sometimes a mistake which is done in the West in particular, and that is to overestimate Russian strength. Because I think that there is an unbalance here, and that is that Ukraine is a democracy. So when there are problems, and of course there are problems, we can see this, the embassies can see this, but you just have to open some Telegram channels and you will see them. which is normal, actually. But in Russia, you cannot see them, because it's not a democracy. It doesn't work like this. Doesn't mean that they don't have problems, but it means it's much more difficult to understand them. So sometimes I think in the West, there is an overestimation of the ability of Russia to continue this fight. Of course, they can continue for the time being, but they cannot continue it forever at this amount of cost. So our job, friends and allies of Ukraine, is to support Ukraine, because at the end of the day, unless, of course, there would be a peace agreement, and that would be wonderful, and let's hope for that, and let's work for this, but at the end of the day, it's a last man standing fight, and we have to be there, and we have to support Ukraine, and we also have to wake up. I think that this is what Natalka said. And I think that this is what we are doing in Europe collectively. In France, for example, we are going to double the budget of French army in 5 years. And this was completely unthinkable. But we are doing this because we have to support Ukraine, and we have to stand up for this global confrontation, of course, with Russia. The security is definitely not the same. So we are all in together, and definitely we have to continue to support Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You're welcome, sir.
Well, believe it or not, I'm also a former economics professor, and you learn in that capacity that the answer to every question always begins with the words, "it depends." And I think that really is the only way to answer the question of what comes next. It does depend. It depends on Europe continuing to do what they have done so impressively. The pace of diplomacy in Europe also has become absolutely breathtaking. So we've talked about the financial and economic assistance, if there can be a 20th round of sanctions, if the United States can come through with the very draconian sanctions in the bill that Senator Graham has pulled together, a huge friend, and of course was out here with Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman so many different times, including that famous photo with an iPhone of the Maidan by Senator McCain. It depends on whether we can truly crush the Russian war economy and also cut off, reduce the revenue that they get, and cut off all of the components that are being provided for its military-industrial capability. I'm glad that there was mention of the extraordinary casualties that Russia has taken. Over 1.2 million killed and wounded. That is actually more than the United States sustained in all of World War II. Put that again in context. Yes, they're a bigger country now, but at the end of the day, that is not sustainable, nor is the economic damage, especially if, as I mentioned earlier, there can be further help for Ukraine for the air and ballistic missile defenses and further ramp up of production, particularly of the Flamingo and the other systems that can really double or triple what it is Ukraine has been able to do in damaging Russia's energy system, in particular the refineries and the fuel storage and so forth. Look, if all of that can be done, and if the Ukrainian military continues to innovate as incredibly impressively as they have been, I really do think that with the National Welfare Fund of Russia running out and all the other challenges it's facing, that there could be a time when Vladimir Putin recognizes that he needs a cessation of hostilities, and thus he needs to negotiate in a serious manner and not in the way that he has been so far. And the more that we can all do to hasten that day, needless to say, the better for Ukraine and for its people and its military. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I would like to thank our distinguished panelists for this wonderful conversation, which was, in my opinion, very useful and important, not only for the audience which is present here, but for all Ukrainians and far beyond. We highly appreciate your unwavering support. We never doubt. Thank you again. Дуже дякую.
Wonderfully done, as always.
Thank you.